Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday and happy May 1st. Sarah and I are so happy to see you this morning. She's filled with lots of licks this morning. Hope that you're having a great day. We are going to read a story today about ducks, which is a great idea in May because you might see some baby ducks when you're away. And this book is actually called Make Way for Ducklings. And it's a great story. And at St. Andrews this week, we talked a lot about birds. So this was one of my favorite bird books. And it's very interesting to see the little babies and what happens to them with their family. So it's called Make Way for Ducklings by Robert McCloskey. This book actually has been around for a really long time. It's one of these classic books. It was written actually in 1941, which is a really long time ago. Make Way for Ducklings. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were looking for a place to live, but every time Mr. Mallard saw what looked like a nice place, Mrs. Mallard said it was no good. There were sure to be foxes in the woods or turtles in the water, and she was not going to raise a family where there might be foxes or turtles. So they flew on and on. When they got to Boston, they felt too tired to fly any further. There was a nice pond in the public garden with a little island on it. That very place would be a good place to spend the night, quacked Mr. Mallard, so down they flapped. The next morning they fished for their breakfast in the mud at the bottom of the pond, but they didn't find very much. Just as they were getting ready to start on their way, a strange, enormous bird came by. It was pushing a boat full of people, and there was a man sitting on the back. Good morning, quacked Mr. Mallard, being polite. The big bird was too proud to answer, but the people on the boat threw peanuts into the water, so the Mallards followed them all around the pond and got another breakfast, better than the first. The swan boat with people on it. If you've ever gone to Boston, they have them there, and after we all get to go out again, maybe you can go visit. I like this place, said Mrs. Mallard as they climbed out on the bank and waddled along. Why don't we build our nest and raise our ducklings right in this pond? There are no foxes and no turtles, and the people feed us peanuts. What could be better? Good, said Mr. Mallard, delighted that at last Mrs. Mallard had found a place that suited her. But something's going to happen. Look out, squawked Mrs. Mallard all of a dither. You get run over. And when she got her breath back, she added, This is no place for babies. With all those things rushing about, we have to look somewhere else. Oh, no. So they flew over Beacon Hill and round the State House, but there was no place there. They looked in Louisburg Square, but there was no water to swim in. Then they flew over the Charles River. This is better, quacked Mr. Mallard. The island looks like a nice, quiet place, and it's only a little way from the public garden. Yes, said Mrs. Mallard, remembering the peanuts. That looks like just the right place to hatch the ducklings. So they chose a cozy spot among the bushes near the water and settled down to build their nest. And only just in time, for now they were beginning to molt. All their old wing feathers started to drop out, and they would not be able to fly again until the new ones grew in. But of course, they could swim. And one day they swam over to the park on the riverbank, and there they met a policeman called Michael. Michael fed them peanuts, and after that, the Mallards called on Michael every day. After Mrs. Mallard had laid 8 eggs in the nest. She couldn't go visit Michael anymore because she had to sit on the eggs to keep them warm. She moved off the nest only to get a drink of water, or to have her lunch, or to count the eggs and make sure that they were all there. One day, the ducklings hatched out. First came Jack, then came Cack, then came Lack, then Mack, then Knack, then Goack, then Pack, then Quack. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were bursting with pride. It was a great responsibility taking care of many ducklings, but it kept them very busy. One day, Mr. Mallard decided he'd like to take a trip to see what the rest of the river was like further on. So off he set. "I'll meet you in a week in the public garden," he quacked over his shoulder. "Take good care of the ducklings." "Oh, don't you worry," said Mrs. Mallard. "I know all about bringing up children." And she did. She taught them how to swim and to dive. She taught them to walk in a line, to come when they were called, and to keep a safe distance from bikes and scooters and other things with wheels. When at last she felt perfectly satisfied with them, she said one morning, "Come along, children, follow me. Before you can wink an eye, Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Oack, Pack, and Quack fell into line just as they had been taught. Mrs. Mallard led the way into the water, and they swam behind her to the opposite bank. And you might be seeing some of this around if you go and visit some ponds when you take a walk. This is the time all the baby birds are being born. They waded ashore, and they waddled along till they came to the highway. Mrs. Mallard stepped out to cross the road. Honk, honk, went the horns and the speeding cars. Quack, went Mrs. Mallard, and tumbled back. Quack, 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 went Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Goack, Pack, and Quack, just as loud as their little quackers could quack. The cars kept speeding by and honking, and Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings just kept right on quack, quack, quacking. They made such a noise that Michael came running, waving his arms and blowing his whistle. He planted himself in the center of the road, raised one hand to stop the traffic, and then beckoned with the other, the way policemen do, for Mrs. Mallard to cross over. As soon as Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings were safe on the other side and on their way down Mount Vernon Street, Michael rushed back to his police booth. I wonder what he's going to do. He called Clancy at headquarters and said, "There's a family of ducks walking down the street." "Family of ducks? What?" "Send policeman car, quick," he said. Meanwhile, Mrs. Mallard had reached the corner bookshop and turned down Charles Street with Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Oack, Pack, and Quack all marching in line behind her. You see them? Everyone stared. An old lady from Beacon Hill said, "Isn't it amazing?" And the man who swept the streets said, "Well, now, ain't that nice?" And when Mrs. Mallard heard them, she was so proud she tipped her nose in the air and walked along with extra swing in her waddle. When they came to the corner of Beacon Street, there was a police car with 4 policemen that Clancy had sent from headquarters. The policemen held back the traffic so Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings could march across the street. Right into the public garden. Inside the gate, they turned around to say thank you to the policeman. The policeman smiled and waved goodbye. And they reached the pond and swam across to the little island where Mr. Mallard waited for them, just as he had promised. The ducklings liked their new island so much that they decided to live there. All day long they followed and swam the boats, and they ate peanuts. And when night falls, they swim to their little island and they go to sleep. And that's the end. Isn't that a great story? So Sara says today she would like you, when you go out this weekend, because it's actually supposed to be a beautiful weekend, to see if you see any birds that have built nests, or even maybe you get to see a baby bird, or if you happen to go out and visit a place where there's a pond or some water, maybe you'll even see some baby ducks or some baby geese, because this is the time. So Sara says she would like you to be on the lookout for all those great nests and baby birds, and maybe even some mommy and daddy birds making nests. I saw one this morning when we went on our walk. So that's our day today. We hope you enjoyed Make Way for Ducklings. Sara had a nice time. She's actually having a little rest now in her bed as we read. She enjoys our stories very much. So have a wonderful Friday and a great weekend, and we'll see you next week for Sara Says. Bye.